Imagine this. A secret meeting on a remote island, totally hush-hush. You've got this shadowy group plotting to basically reshape a whole nation's destiny. Now, picture something seemingly completely unrelated. A huge maritime disaster, right? The sinking of this supposedly unsinkable ship.
Yeah, the Titanic.
Exactly. And it just so happens that this tragedy eliminates some key figures, powerful people who were standing right in the way of that secret island plan.
Wow.
Coincidence? Or we may be looking at, a really chilling chapter in some kind of meticulously planned saga. That's the rabbit hole we're diving into today.
Sounds deep.
It is. Our mission here really is to guide you through this stack of pretty fascinating source material we've got. It connects the dots, or claims to connect them, between the creation of the Federal Reserve, the immense influence of the Rothschild banking dynasty,
right, the big name,
and the incredibly dramatic, tragic sinking of the Titanic. So we're going to unpack these historical claims, look at who our sources say were the masterminds, and explore how these events, according to this material, intertwine to just fundamentally change the financial landscape of the U.S. And, they argue, change the lives of every single American forever.
That's a huge claim.
It really is. And you might be thinking, okay, these are just dusty old stories, maybe a bit, out there for the history books.
Right, sounds like conspiracy stuff.
Could be. But the implications, as we'll sort of uncover together, they ripple right into our economy today, touching your daily life in ways you probably haven't considered. So get ready for some pretty surprising facts and connections. Might make you see history and definitely your money in a whole new light.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where do we start? Across the Atlantic, I guess.
Exactly. You can't really understand the American story without looking there first.
Right. So to really get a handle on what our sources are calling this debt money system in America, we do need to look across the pond. Europe, central banking really took root there centuries earlier. Yeah. The material highlights the Bank of England, established way back, 1694. And this wasn't just, another bank down the street. Right. No, it was granted the sole and exclusive right to issue banknotes, which basically means it got the power to create the nation's money.
Create it, like print it.
Essentially, yes. And this power, it wasn't given to like a public trust or the government itself. It was granted under very specific, very profitable conditions to a group, a cartel really, of wealthy men, led by a guy named William Patterson.
Okay.
They agreed to loan King William III a huge amount back then, 1.2 million pounds sterling, but not out of kindness.
Okay.
A pretty staggering 8% interest. So this one move effectively put this private group in charge as the main money source for English commerce, for the government itself. It laid the groundwork.
So wait, let me get this straight. Right from the start, this incredible power to basically just invent money, make it appear out of thin air, it was privatized?
That's what the sources argue, yes.
And that act, it didn't just pave the way for what we now call fractional reserve banking. It, cemented it.
Exactly. The bankers, as one source puts it quite vividly, were creating money out of nothing. They were issuing paper claims, promises basically, that were way bigger than the actual gold they had stored away.
Wow.
They could print money, loan it straight to the government, and boom, instant national debt that wasn't there before. That grew fast. By 1698, just 4 years later, the British government reportedly owed something like 16 million pounds to the Bank of England.
16 million in 4 years.
Yeah, shows you just how quickly this system could pile up massive, ever-growing national debt.
Okay, so that sets the stage in England. Where do the Rothschilds fit into this picture? Because their name always comes up.
Right. Our material definitely points to the Rothschild family as this, dominant, almost legendary force in this whole evolving world of central banking and global finance.
Legendary how? We talking big money.
Huge money. Their wealth is estimated by these sources to be in the trillions, making them just an unparalleled financial power.
Trillions. That's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. And Baron Nathan Mayer Rothschild, he was a key figure. He apparently boasted, pretty famously, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England. The man that controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply."
Wow. He actually said that.
According to our sources, yes. And they argue it wasn't just bragging. It was a cold, hard statement about the immense power they had and the power they were always looking to centralize. Shows they knew exactly where the real control was.
Okay, now here's where I remember reading something really wild. The sources say the Rothschilds didn't just get rich, they got massively rich. through some pretty clever, maybe ruthless moves, like after the Battle of Waterloo.
Ah, yes, the Waterloo story. It's a classic in this narrative. Our sources detail how Nathan Rothschild used this incredibly sophisticated network of private couriers, even carrier pigeons, apparently.
Pigeons. Seriously.
Yep, pigeons. To get the news of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, a full 24 hours before the British government even knew.
Okay, so he had inside info. What did he do?
He played the market brilliantly, if ruthlessly. He started selling off his own British government bonds, called consols, on the London Stock Exchange.
Selling. But Napoleon lost. Shouldn't he be buying?
Exactly. But everyone saw Rothschild selling, the biggest name in finance. So they panicked. They assumed Napoleon must have won. England was done for.
Ah, clever. Creates a panic.
A massive panic. Everyone else started frantically dumping their bonds, their securities, for cents on the dollar, as the source puts it, just trying to get out.
And Nathan?
At the absolute bottom of this panic he created, he and his agents quietly swooped in and bought up everything. All those devalued bonds, dirt cheap.
So he basically crashed the market on purpose and then bought it all back.
That's the story. Gaining control of England, or at least its financial core, for just a tiny fraction of its real value. It was pure calculation, using misinformation, psychological games, made a colossal fortune, and consolidated immense power.
That's, wow. Ruthless is one word for it.
Indeed. And the sources suggest this wasn't a one-off. A core idea in their strategy, allegedly, was that the wealth of the Rothschilds consists of the bankruptcy of nations.
Bankruptcy of nations. That sounds grim.
It does. The claim is their huge fortunes were made during the great crashes of history and the great wars of history, exactly when everyone else was losing everything.
So they profited from chaos.
Or even orchestrated it, according to some interpretations in the material, financing both sides of major wars, for example, and then profiting massively from the debts run up by everyone involved. It's a recurring theme, this accumulation of wealth during times of widespread suffering and national debt.
And this goes back to their origins.
Yet the family started in Frankfurt. Mayor Amschel Rothschild. He adapted the city's coat of arms, apparently, to show 5 golden arrows, symbolizing his 5 sons, each sent to a different major European financial center: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt.
Like spreading their influence.
Exactly. A powerful symbol of their reach and ambition across Europe.
Okay, so this brings us to a really fundamental and maybe, disturbing idea behind the concept of a central bank, according to these sources. It's not presented as this stabilizing force we're often told about.
No, not at all. It's presented as a mechanism specifically designed to enslave the people of the country to a debt money system.
Enslave them? How?
Through perpetual debt. In this alleged system, the taxes you pay, they aren't primarily going to roads or schools. They're mostly covering the interest on this ever-increasing national debt owed to the central bank.
So the Federal Reserve, the U.S. central bank, our sources say it's part of this.
Explicitly. Described as a privately owned bank, not truly federal, despite the name, with just 10 private member banks owning it and collecting, get this, supposedly $400 billion a year through the IRS.
The IRS.
Yeah, the sources claim the IRS basically acts as a collection agency for the Fed. They even name names, like the Rockefeller-owned Chase Manhattan Bank as a key private owner in this system.
Privately owned, collecting billions through the IRS. That's not the picture most people have.
Definitely not. And this debt economy, as they call it, is painted as a global thing, where incredibly, 6 billion people are in debt to about 250 men, a tiny elite.
250 men controlling global debt.
That's the claim. And their immense wealth, the sources argue, is kind of phony or illusory. Why? Because it has created money without any gold backing.
Money created with no backing.
Right. It challenges our whole idea of what money even is. It's portrayed not as a stable measure of value, but as a tool for control. Designed to keep people and nations in debt, consolidating power, built on, well, basically nothing but a promise and government decree. The implication is our whole financial reality is based on this manufactured idea.
Okay, this is heavy stuff. Let's shift focus now. Fast forward to November 1910, a really key moment in this whole story, according to the sources. The setting, Jekyll Island.
Jekyll Island, November 1910. 7 bankers meeting in secret to create America's central bank. We just can't call it that.
The 1907 panic nearly destroyed us. Banks failed, fortunes vanished.
We want to control America's money supply, create booms, trigger busts,
and profit from both. And how will we do that?
We'll create money from nothing, loan it to the government, and charge interest. Legal counterfeiting, my friends.
But there's a cost. Every dollar we print steals value from existing dollars. It's a hidden tax that flows directly to us. And it gets worse. If we ever get off the gold standard, governments can print money for wars. Endless wars become possible and profitable. Since Americans hate central banks, we'll call it the Federal Reserve. Sounds governmental, doesn't it? It's not. The president will appoint board members, but we'll pick who he appoints. We'll have 12 regional banks. Looks decentralized, democratic even, but New York banks control them all. That's us. You're probably wondering how we're going to get this through Congress. December 23rd, 1913. Most of Congress home for Christmas. Perfect timing for passing unpopular legislation. I'll publicly oppose our own bill in Congress. They'll pass it thinking they beat Wall Street. We'll fund university chairs, write the textbooks. They'll teach our system as economic science. Beautiful. Every American born after this will inherit debt on money we created from nothing. Generational servitude. The Federal Reserve. Not federal, no reserves. But everyone will think it's their government protecting them.
Ah, Jekyll Island, the infamous meeting.
Infamous is right. A secluded, very exclusive retreat off the Georgia coast. And our sources don't paint this as some friendly gathering of economists. They call it a secret assembly of vultures.
Vultures, strong word.
Yeah, literally hunting for, and I quote, the biggest prize of all, the absolute and complete control of all the money in America. This wasn't just a weekend getaway. It was a deliberate, top-secret operation planned to be totally hidden from the public eye.
And the guest list. Pretty exclusive, I bet.
Absolutely. The attendees were basically a who's who of the most powerful financiers and economists of the time, representing the biggest financial empires.
Like who? Give us some names.
Okay. You had Senator Nelson Aldrich, huge figure in Congress, closely tied to Rockefeller interests, and Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank, also Rockefeller's man.
Okay, Rockefeller represented. Who
Then you had Henry P. Davison, senior partner at J.P. Morgan & Co., and J.P. Morgan himself, the big man, representing the Morgan Empire.
Morgan, too. Titans of finance.
Definitely. And crucially, Paul Moritz Warburg, German immigrant, partner in Kuhn Loeb & Co., which the sources strongly linked to the Rothschilds. Warburg is consistently painted as the intellectual architect of the whole Fed plan.
The architect. Got it.
Any others? Yeah, also A. Piet Andrew, who was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury at the time, and Benjamin Strong, a key aide to J.P. Morgan, who later became the first head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Quite the lineup. And they met in secret.
Total secrecy. They deliberately faked a hunting trip, went to great lengths. They even told the other members of the exclusive Jekyll Island Club that the clubhouse would be totally occupied for 2 weeks for, get this, stag parties and other pursuits unrelated to hunting.
Stag parties.
Yeah. Just underscores the extreme measures they took to hide what they were really up to.
That detail about the stag parties really hammers it home, doesn't it? The level of concealment.
It really does. This wasn't just, keeping things quiet. It was active deception, meticulously planned to keep the public, Congress, even the rest of the financial world completely in the dark.
Suggests they knew what they were doing was controversial at the very least.
Exactly. The sheer effort involved in the secrecy speaks volumes about how sensitive they thought this was and, the massive stakes involved. They were aiming to fundamentally rewire the American financial system without any outside eyes or debate.
So what was the ultimate goal of this secret meeting?
No ambiguity there, according to the sources. The objective was crystal clear. Make sure a central bank, modeled very much on the European ones they knew and admired, would finally be set up in the United States.
A central bank like the Bank of England.
Pretty much. An institution that they envisioned would give these private bankers everything they had always wanted.
Which was?
Control. The core goal was to grab absolute control over the nation's money supply and credit, taking it out of the public sphere where it had sort of traditionally been managed, however imperfectly, and putting it firmly into their private hands.
So Jekyll Island was the key moment. The planning stage.
It was the culmination of a long-held dream for them, apparently. A crucial, secret step towards building this lasting system of private financial control over the U.S. economy.
And Paul Warburg, you mentioned him as the architect.
Yeah, he's central to this part of the story. Paul Warburg, the German immigrant partner at Kuhn, Loeb & Co., he really stands out as the intellectual heavyweight.
The brains behind the operation.
That's how our sources consistently portray him, the most technically proficient guy there. And crucially, the main person who actually drafted the plan, the blueprint for what eventually became the Federal Reserve System.
Why him specifically?
His background was perfect for it. He'd done deep studies of banking in Hamburg, London, Paris, knew the European central bank models inside out. So he was uniquely positioned to kind of translate that European model into an American context. Our sources basically say he wrote the whole thing.
Okay, so what was his philosophy? What kind of system did he design?
Well, his sophisticated approach, as laid out in the sources, it boiled down to three key things: centralizing of reserves, mobilizing commercial credit, and getting an elastic note issue. Okay, break that down. Centralizing reserves.
Basically pooling the gold and cash held by lots of individual banks into one central institution that gives immense power to whoever controls that central pool.
Right. Mobilizing commercial credit.
That means freeing up huge amounts of capital that could then be used for large-scale lending, making it much easier to expand credit throughout the economy, fuel growth or potentially bubbles.
And the elastic note issue, that sounds important.
Very important. Elastic note issue meant having the power to easily expand or shrink the money supply, whatever they wanted, without being strictly tied to gold reserves. It allows for significant management, or some would say manipulation, of the economy.
Flexible money supply.
Exactly. And this mobilization of credit part, it became particularly critical because, as one source points out, the First World War was due to begin shortly, and the first task of the Federal Reserve System would be to finance the World War.
Wow. So they're saying the Fed was created almost in anticipation of financing World War I.
That's the direct implication in the material. A profound, immediate link between creating the Fed and funding massive global conflict, leading to what's repeatedly called inextinguishable debt. Okay, so this idea of a central bank wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms in America, historically speaking.
Oh, definitely not. The idea wasn't new, and it faced fierce resistance right from the beginning. This battle had really deep historical roots.
Like who resisted?
Thomas Jefferson, for one. He famously argued vehemently against the first Bank of the United States, the one set up back in 1791 by Alexander Hamilton.
What were Jefferson's arguments? He believed it was flat out contrary to the Constitution. He worried about monopolies, about foreign alien ownership of American land and assets, and about concentrating so much economic power in private hands. He saw it as a direct threat to American independence and its Republican ideals.
So this fight goes way back.
Right back to the founding. Alexander Hamilton's original plan for that first bank, our sources claim, was actually backed by James Rothschild himself.
Rothschild again. Involved even then.
Allegedly, yeah. Showing this long history of supposed foreign influence. And the fight continued. Andrew Jackson's famous war against the Second Bank of the United States in the 1830s.
Oh, Old Hickory. He hated the bank, right?
Absolutely despised it. He famously declared to the bankers, "You are a den of vipers. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out." And he actually did it.
He killed the bank.
He did. He dismantled the Second Bank, vetoed its recharter, led to something called the independent sub-treasury system, which was a big move to keep government money out of private banks, ensuring public control. It's a stark reminder that this fight over who controls the money is a recurring theme in U.S. history.
So Jackson won that battle, but the idea didn't die.
Not according to these sources. They allege the pro-central bank forces just shifted tactics. They claim that the big financial panics, 1873, 1893, 1907, weren't just natural market corrections.
What were they then?
They were the result of the international bankers' operations in London. Essentially engineered crises.
Engineered how?
By strategically tightening the money supply, calling in loans, pulling gold out of the system, create financial chaos. Then, when the public is suffering and demanding action, demanding monetary reform.
The bankers step in with their solution.
Exactly. They rush to head off and control the reform movement by proposing their own central bank plan, framed as the solution, making sure any changes serve their interests, not actually limiting their power. The 1907 panic, for instance, happened when harvests were good, things seemed prosperous, which made many people, including our sources, suspicious that it was artificial.
And people at the time saw this.
Some did. Congressman Charles Augustus Lindbergh, Senior father of the famous aviator, he's a very vocal opponent, saw right through it.
What did he say?
He explicitly called the Aldrich Plan, that was the precursor to the Fed, came right out of Jekyll Island. He called it the Wall Street Plan. Said it was a scheme plainly in the interest of the trust, meaning the big banking trusts.
He didn't pull any punches.
Not at all. He even suggested that maybe another engineered panic might be necessary to intimidate the people into finally accepting this central bank system. He also pointed out the hypocrisy. The government was supposedly busting other monopolies, like in oil or steel, but seemed to be actively supporting this money trust. Showed deep suspicion.
So, after Jekyll Island, they had the plan. How did they sell it? You mentioned Lindbergh called it the Wall Street Plan. That doesn't sound popular.
No, it wasn't initially. So a massive nationwide propaganda campaign was launched to push the Aldrich Plan, to sell this central bank idea to the American public.
Propaganda. Funded by who?
Our sources claim it was funded by a huge $5 million slush fund. That's a lot of money back then, put up by the very bankers who were at Jekyll Island.
$5 million. Wow. How did they spend it?
They allegedly used universities, Princeton, Harvard, the University of Chicago, as rallying points for this propaganda. Got prominent professors like J. Lawrence Laughlin from Chicago to basically champion the plan.
So they made it look like impartial academic support.
That was the idea. Frame it as objective, public education, expert opinion, subtly shaping public perception in favor of what the bankers wanted.
And where does Woodrow Wilson fit into this propaganda effort?
Wilson. At the time, he was governor of New Jersey, and importantly, he had been president of Princeton University. Our sources say he was specifically enlisted as a spokesman for the Aldrich Plan.
Why him?
It was fascinating. Back during the Panic of 1907, Wilson had apparently said something like, all this trouble could be averted if we appointed a committee of 6 or 7 public-spirited men like J.P. Morgan to handle the affairs of our country.
Like J.P. Morgan. Wow, that's surprisingly open to private control for a future president.
Exactly. It showed he was potentially sympathetic to the idea of elite, private management of the nation's finances. Made him seem like a potentially useful, maybe strategically chosen figurehead to promote the bankers' agenda, especially with the 1912 election coming up.
Okay, but there was still suspicion, right? Lindbergh wasn't alone. What about Congress? Didn't they investigate the money trust?
They did. Or rather, they went through the motions. The Pujo Committee hearings were held in 1912, supposedly to investigate this powerful money trust. But our sources describe the hearings as basically a farce.
A farce? How so?
Well, they claim the whole thing was deliberately dragged out for 5 months. And it was run by Samuel Untermeyer, a very wealthy corporate lawyer who also happened to be a major donor to Woodrow Wilson's presidential campaign.
Conflict of interest, much.
You could say that. And crucially, the outspoken opponents, guys like Senator La Follette and Congressman Lindbergh, they were effectively blocked from testifying, prevented from presenting their side.
So no real opposition was heard.
That's the claim. The source material says the hearings ended without a single well-known opponent of the money creators being allowed to appear or testify.
But they still served a purpose.
Oh, yeah. They served the bankers' purpose perfectly, according to this view. They convinced the public, see, there is a dangerous banking monopoly, and then presented the bankers' own legislation, cleverly disguised as reform, as the only solution.
Clever manipulation.
The bankers, when they testified, they admitted being bankers, sure, but insisted they only ever acted in the public interest. And the press, which the sources imply was largely controlled or influenced, echoed this narrative. They even started promoting Paul Warburg, the actual architect from Jekyll Island, as the perfect, benevolent expert to run this new system. It was a masterful PR job, controlling the narrative.
Okay, so this sets the stage for the 1912 election. Wilson's running. How did that play out according to these sources? Was it straightforward?
Not at all. The sources described the 1912 presidential election as a carefully managed political upset orchestrated by these same money creators.
An upset how? Taft was the incumbent Republican.
Right. The key move, they claim, was Theodore Roosevelt running as a third-party candidate, the Bull Moose Party.
Teddy Roosevelt. That split the Republican vote, right?
Exactly. And our sources claim Roosevelt's campaign was exceptionally well-financed and got unlimited press coverage, way more than his actual support might have warranted. The result, he split the Republican vote, taking votes away from Taft, which guaranteed Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, would win.
And why was Wilson winning so important to them?
Because, as the sources explain, they believed a successful Democratic candidate, supported by a Democratic Congress, would be able to pass the central bank plan. They apparently doubted that Taft, the Republican incumbent, could or would push the Aldrich plan through effectively.
So they manipulated the election to get their man in.
The sources go even further. They suggest these banking interests actually financed all three major candidates, Wilson, Roosevelt, and Taft, hedging their bets, essentially ensuring they controlled the outcome no matter who technically won the popular vote.
Covering all bases. Okay, so Wilson wins. The path is clear for the Federal Reserve Act.
Pretty much. The final step, the actual passage of the act, was apparently a masterpiece of legislative timing and, well, maneuvering.
How so?
It happened right before Christmas, 1913. Most congressmen were getting ready to leave Washington for the holidays, assuming no major bills would be debated or voted on until the new year. It was sort of an unwritten rule.
But they broke the rule.
Big time. According to our sources, in a single day, they ironed out all 40 of the disputed passages in the bill and quickly brought it to a vote. Just like that.
One day.
For something this huge.
Yep. Monday, December 22nd, 1913. With many of the key opponents already gone home for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act passed the House easily, 282 to 60, and the Senate 43 to 23. It was incredibly fast, very secretive, and, the sources argue, fundamentally undemocratic.
And Warburg was behind this rush.
This unprecedented speed is directly attributed in the sources to Paul Warburg's fine hand, his meticulous planning, making sure there were no hitches, the critics were out of town, that long-standing political courtesy about not doing major business right before Christmas, rudely shattered, as one source puts it, specifically to perpetrate the Federal Reserve Act on the American people. What about the press? Did they report on this last-minute rush?
The New York Times, usually the paper of record, reportedly buried Congressman Lindbergh's stark warning. He called the bill something like the most gigantic trust on earth, deep inside the paper, minimized its impact, kept the public largely unaware of the true scale and implications.
And then Wilson signed it.
Signed it into law the very next day, December 23, 1913. Some sources dramatically claim that date marked the effective end of the Constitution as America's governing document, arguing it handed American liberties over to this small, private group of international bankers.
Okay, so the act is passed. Let's talk about the Fed itself. What is it, according to these sources? Because the name Federal Reserve sounds official, sounds governmental.
Right. The names is genius from their perspective. But our sources are absolutely clear. It is not federal. It's not part of the government.
Not federal.
Nope. It has no reserves in the sense of backing the currency with something tangible or protecting national wealth. And it's not a system at all, but rather a criminal syndicate or a private cartel. That's the language used.
Strong words again. So it's a private bank.
Unequivocally, yes. A privately owned bank. Its stock, its ownership is held entirely by the commercial banks that are members of the system. The U.S. government has never, ever owned a single share.
Never owned a share. So control lies with the banks, not the public or elected officials.
Precisely. That's the fundamental point that contradicts the public image of the Fed as a government agency working for the national interest. Control rests with private corporations, the member banks.
Do the sources name these original owners, the banks that held the stock?
They do. They specifically point to the stockholders of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is the most powerful branch. It sets interest rates, controls the money supply for the whole country, basically.
And who were they?
The big names you'd expect. Rockefeller interests, Kuhn, Loeb & Co., Warburg's firm linked to Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan interests, Rothschild interests directly, Lazard Frères, Warburg's again, Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs.
The absolute giants of finance at the time.
Exactly. These aren't just abstract entities. These are families, financial dynasties that, according to our material, have controlled our political and economic destinies since 1914. The sources even highlight that the Rockefeller-Kuhn, Loeb-controlled National City Bank took the biggest single chunk of stock in the New York Fed. Shows the concentration of power right from the start.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the most controversial and honestly pretty chilling claim in all this material, the Titanic.
Oh, yes, the Titanic connection. This is where the narrative takes a really dark turn.
Dark and audacious. The claim is, flat out, that the sinking of the Titanic wasn't an accident, that it was deliberately engineered.
Engineered for what purpose?
To get rid of specific, very powerful people who were dead set against the creation of the Federal Reserve. This isn't just, idle speculation in these sources. It's presented as a cold, calculated move to eliminate financial opposition.
That's an extraordinary claim, saying the sinking was basically an assassination plot.
That's essentially the implication. The quote is stark. The unsinkable ship, The floating palace was created to be the tomb for the wealthy who opposed the Federal Reserve System.
Created to be a tomb. Wow.
Yeah. And the sources state that by April 1912, that's when the Titanic sank, all opposition to the Federal Reserve was eliminated, clearing the path, basically, for the Fed to be created without issue in December 1913.
So the tragedy is framed as a necessary step.
A crucial, orchestrated step in establishing the central bank, suggesting the stakes were so incredibly high that these kinds of extreme measures were seen as, well, justifiable by those involved. Who were these opponents? The specific people on the Titanic they wanted gone.
The sources name 3 prominent, extremely wealthy and influential men: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus.
Astor, he was one of the richest men in the world, right?
Absolutely. Huge real estate holdings, massive financial influence. His opposition would have been a major obstacle. Guggenheim was a mining tycoon, and Straus was the co-owner of Macy's department store. These were not small players.
And they were all against the Fed.
According to the sources, yes, they were strongly against the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. Their deaths, the argument goes, conveniently removed significant roadblocks to the bankers' plan. It's also noted that John Jacob Astor's young wife, Madeline, actually survived the sinking. Highlighting who didn't die.
Potentially.
Yeah. Showing maybe a selective aspect to the tragedy, if you follow this line of reasoning.
Okay, what about the details of the sinking itself? Did the sources connect anything there to this alleged plot?
They do. Beyond Astor, Guggenheim, and Straus perishing while Astor's wife survived, they point to other things, like the lifeboats.
Not enough lifeboats, right? That's well known.
Not only not enough, but many of the lifeboats that were launched were apparently only half full, often primarily with women and children, leaving hundreds of others, including these powerful men, to die in the freezing Atlantic.
But wasn't that women and children first?
It was, but the sources imply the execution was flawed, or perhaps even manipulated, leaving key targets vulnerable. And then there are the distress flares.
The flares, what about them?
The Titanic fired white flares. Standard maritime procedure for a ship in distress needing immediate rescue was to fire red flares. White flares usually just signaled company identification or maybe even a celebration.
White instead of red, so nearby ships wouldn't realize the urgency.
That's the contention,
that
it was deliberate misdirection. There was another ship nearby, the SS Californian, reportedly within sight for much of the night. Red flares might have spurred them into immediate action. White flares, less likely. The sources suggest this could have been intended to prevent timely assistance, sealing the fate of those specific individuals.
Deliberate misdirection. That adds another layer of potential intent. This is already sounding incredibly complex, but the sources go even further, don't they? Mentioning the Jesuits.
Ah, yes. This introduces yet another very deep layer of intrigue, really pushing the boundaries of conventional history. The source material claims the sinking lies at the door of the Jesuit order.
The Jesuits, how do they fit in?
It connects them to a much broader alleged web of influence, including, bizarrely, the Federal Reserve Bank's supposed financing of the Communist Revolution in Russia.
Jesuits, the Fed, and the Russian Revolution. That's a lot to connect.
It is. The sources even bring up Congressman Louis McFadden. He was a really fierce critic of the Fed back in the 1930s, made speeches denouncing it. He died under somewhat mysterious circumstances, and these sources claim he was poisoned, died from the Jesuits' poison cup after he exposed these alleged connections. These are undeniably extraordinary and very grave accusations found in the material.
How specifically do they link the Jesuits to the Titanic sinking itself?
Well, one narrative involves Father Francis Brown. He was a Jesuit priest who was actually on the Titanic for the first leg of its journey, from Southampton to Queenstown, Ireland. He took many famous photos on board. He got off before the ship sailed for New York and sank.
So he wasn't on board when it sank?
No, but some theories within this material suggest he might have played a role beforehand, with the most extreme versions, even claiming he somehow hypnotized Captain Edward Smith to steer the ship towards disaster.
Hypnotize the captain. Okay, that's really out there.
It is definitely on the far end of the spectrum of claims. The sources also try to weave this Jesuit influence into other global events, like linking Joseph Stalin's early education at an Orthodox seminary in Tiflis to Jesuit training or influence.
Stalin, too?
Yeah, it paints this picture of a hidden, long-term, incredibly far-reaching power structure, influencing not just finance, but major world political events over centuries. These are the deeper conspiracy theories embedded within our source material.
Okay, moving past the Titanic, let's get back to the Federal Reserve itself. It's established in late 1913. What happens next, according to these sources? What role does it play?
Well, with the Fed firmly in place by 1914, our sources immediately link its existence to the outbreak of World War I just months later.
How?
They argue that complex schemes had to be constructed to get the government to borrow vast sums of money, ensuring a continuously growing national debt would happen. The Fed's very first task, according to this narrative, was precisely to finance the World War.
Creating debt to fund the war.
Inextinguishable debt, they call it. This was vital, the sources claim, because the European powers were already heavily armed but nearly bankrupt from their military spending. The new American central bank, the Fed, provided this fresh, seemingly bottomless pit of credit needed to fund the massive escalating conflict.
So the Fed enabled the war on that scale.
That's the argument. And this pattern, they allege, didn't stop there. It continued right into the 1920s, leading up to the next major catastrophe.
The Great Depression.
Exactly. The sources claim the Federal Reserve deliberately withheld money from circulation through its policies in the late 1920s, actively causing the 1929 stock market crash and the decade-long Great Depression that followed.
They caused the Depression on purpose.
That's the assertion. It wasn't an accident or a natural market failure. It was their weapon, a tool used to further consolidate power and wealth, wiping out competitors and allowing them to buy up assets cheaply.
A weapon. That's chilling. Any evidence cited?
They quote Winston Churchill, apparently reflecting after the crash, saying something like, "Now I know who wields the real power," suggesting even he perceived hidden forces at work. They also point to the earlier agricultural depression of 1920-21.
What about that?
They attribute that specifically to the Fed's sudden contraction of credit and currency. A calculated move, they say, timed perfectly to bankrupt American farmers right after they've been encouraged during the war years to borrow heavily and invest in more land to feed Europe. Pull the rug out from under them.
Wow. So a pattern of boom and bust, allegedly engineered.
That's the narrative presented. Engineered cycles benefiting the central bankers. And throughout this, there's this constant theme of the London connection.
The London connection. Back to the Bank of England and the Rothschilds.
Precisely. The influence of the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England is consistently emphasized. Our material flatly suggests that back in 1910, and even continuing today, the United States was, quote, for all practical purposes being ruled from England.
Ruled from England? How?
Through the financial system. American bank holding companies, they claim, were, and maybe still are, firmly controlled by international firms that have major London branches, all operating under the aegis of the House of Rothschild. It implies this deep, ongoing, often invisible foreign influence over American money and policy.
Can they point to specific examples of this coordination?
They mention individuals like Sir Montague Norman. He was the governor of the Bank of England for a very long time. Our sources claim he organized informal talks between central bank heads in 1927. Secret meetings, essentially. And these talks, they argue, led directly to the great stock market crash of 1929.
How? What did they discuss?
The details are murky, but the implication is coordinated policy manipulation. They specifically mention the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, run by Benjamin Strong back then. Strong reportedly guided the Fed's discount rate policy, the interest rate it charged banks specifically to help the Bank of England, helping Europe get back on the gold standard, even if it meant doing so, quote, at America's expense, potentially contributing to the unstable conditions before the crash.
So U.S. policy potentially being driven by London's needs.
That's the strong suggestion in the material. And it clashes sharply with the Fed's public image, right? The idea that it's supposed to ensure stability for America.
Yeah, the whole point is supposed to be stability fighting inflation.
Well, here's another shocker from the sources. They reveal a 1939 internal memorandum from the Federal Reserve Board itself. And in this memo, the board explicitly states that it opposes any bill which proposes a stable price level.
It opposes stable prices. Seriously.
That's what the source claims the memo says, directly contradicting the public perception of the Fed as an inflation fighter. G. Edward Griffin, one of the main authors cited in our material, argues this proves the Fed isn't fighting inflation at all. He calls it an inflation-creating institution, essentially a banking cartel designed to profit from the expansion of credit and the steady erosion of the dollar's value, not prevent it.
Okay, so if they're creating inflation, how does this money machine actually work? How do banks, as you said earlier, create money out of nothing?
Right. The source does really try to break down the mechanics, what they call the scam. G. Edward Griffin explains it pretty bluntly. Banks create money out of nothing, and then they collect interest on it.
How is that possible? Where does the money come from?
He says when you go into a bank and get a loan, that money you receive doesn't exist prior to your walking into the bank. It's not like they take it out of someone else's savings account.
So where does it come from?
It's literally just a book entry. They type numbers into an account. New money, created on the spot, backed by your promise to pay it back, with interest. That act of lending creates the deposit.
Just created.
By typing. That's the essence of it, according to Griffin in these sources. And this seemingly magical process, they argue, this scam, is made perfectly legal by government laws, effectively making the government a partner in enabling this system.
And how does this scale up? You mentioned billions earlier.
Yeah, the scale is dramatic because of fractional reserves. For every, say, $1 billion that gets created out of nothing for the government itself to spend when the Fed buys government bonds, the private banking system can then use that as a base to create another $9 billion, again, out of nothing, through loans to businesses, to individuals like you and me for mortgages, car loans, whatever. 9 times multiplier. Roughly, yeah. It varies, but that's the principle. And the really insidious part, they argue, is that we then pay interest on all that newly created money. That nothing, thinking we're borrowing real existing savings. But the money was conjured into existence just for our loan. It creates this system where debt is always expanding, and the interest payments require even more money to be created through more borrowing. It's a cycle.
An endless cycle of debt creation. And the secrecy around the Fed, you mentioned it started at Jekyll Island. Does that secrecy continue?
Absolutely. The sources argue that secrecy remains a key feature. Before the Fed existed, individual banks had to be really careful, really prudent. They needed significant reserves because if people lost confidence, you'd get a bank run and the bank could collapse.
Right, makes sense.
But after the Fed was created, acting as a lender of last resort, our sources suggest banks became much more reckless. Why? Because they knew deep down that if they got into trouble, they could probably rely on taxpayer-funded bailouts.
The too big to fail idea.
Exactly. This safety net, they argue, encourages risky behavior. It applies to huge questionable loans made to, say, third world countries that eventually default, or massive loans to large corporations right here in the U.S. that get into trouble.
And the public picks up the tab.
That's the claim. In those crises, the public is always urged to support bailouts in the name of protecting you folks, protecting the system, which effectively means the public, the taxpayers, socialize the losses, while the private banking system gets to keep the profits they made during the good times, privatize the gains, socialize the losses. A recurring pattern in this debt system, according to the sources.
And this isn't just a national thing. You mentioned global ambitions earlier.
Right. The ambition, the sources argue, is definitely global. Take the Bretton Woods system set up after World War II. Publicly, it was all about stabilizing international currencies, promoting trade, using fixed exchange rates tied to the U.S. dollar, which was then tied to gold. Sounds reasonable.
But secretly.
Secretly, according to G. Edward Griffin again, the real goal was to eventually bury the concept of a gold or silver-backed currency entirely, worldwide. Sever that last link between money and any tangible asset.
Why would they want to do that?
To create a purely international currency, which would be entirely flexible. Flexible meaning it could be created completely out of nothing at the political whims of whoever was in charge. No more constraints from gold reserves or anything real. Pure fiat money, globally managed.
And institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, they fit into this.
They're presented by our sources as basically the international version of the game called the bailout. When nations get into debt trouble, often from loans facilitated by these very institutions, the IMF and World Bank step in with rescue packages. But those packages come with strings attached austerity measures, policy changes that further integrate the country into this global financial system and often increase its overall indebtedness. It moves the debt game from national to international control.
So it's about globalizing the debt system.
That's the argument. It reflects what the sources call the internationalist loyalties of the figures behind these institutions. Their ultimate goal isn't necessarily the prosperity of individual nations, but the creation of a single global currency, a unified global monetary system, and maybe, eventually, a global government. And they assert this grand plan is steadily unfolding exactly according to plan, bit by bit, often unnoticed.
Okay, wow. So let's try to wrap our heads around all this. We've journeyed through some really extraordinary claims today. We started with that clandestine summit on Jekyll Island.
Right, the secret meeting of bankers.
Then we looked at the long historical fight against central banks in America, people like Jefferson and Jackson pushing back hard.
A fight that was ultimately lost, in their view.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
And then we hit that truly astonishing assertion that the Titanic disaster wasn't an accident, but somehow served this clandestine financial agenda, removing key opposition to the Fed.
A very chilling claim indeed.
We saw how powerful families, especially the Rothschilds and their allies, allegedly built this system where money itself is created from debt. A system designed, according to these sources, to concentrate incredible wealth and power in very few hands.
Impacting billions of people.
Yeah, impacting billions, all while being wrapped in layers of secrecy and operating in ways most people just don't understand.
And these accounts, while definitely controversial, maybe even hard to believe at times, they do present a remarkably consistent narrative when you read through them.
Consistent how?
Consistent in arguing that the financial system we have today wasn't some natural evolution or the result of public demand or democratic choice. It was born from private ambition, from calculated schemes, and it leads, they claim, to these repeating cycles of debt, crisis, and ever-increasing control.
There was that quote you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the idea that whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolutely master of all industry, commerce, and even life itself. That quote really resonates with the core message here, suggesting a power that goes far beyond elected governments.
So, the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given these really extraordinary claims, these historical patterns of alleged manipulation and hidden control we've explored today, what does it actually mean for you? For your savings, the value of your paycheck, your ability to plan for the future? What does it mean when the very nature and value of your money, maybe even the path history takes, could potentially be influenced by powerful interests that we're told are private, independent, and acting in our best interest?
Yeah. What hidden strings might still be pulling the levers, shaping the economy, creating booms and busts, influencing politics, all behind the curtain?
And how might understanding these possibilities, even just considering them, change how you look at your own financial decisions, how you view the news, your government, the whole world around you? Something to think about for sure.
Yeah.